ambiguity, no noise. Let's come straight to the point. If you look at Kashmir's politics and think to yourself that this is a landmine waiting to explode, wait till you wrestle with Kashmir's history. That is a landmine, unlike any landmine you have seen. Deeply contentious, heavily politicized, and biased, like any other history of colonized people. Just like history of rest of India in post-independent India was written to glorify or whitewash crimes of invaders, Kashmir's history is no different. The dominant narrative here is that Islam spread peacefully in Kashmir through Sufis or missionaries. This narrative flies in the face of civilizational memory that Hindus of Kashmir have passed on from one generation to another. When mainstream history denies you space, truth has a very strange way of coming out. Our songs, phrases in our language, our day to day language has references to centuries of persecution that the community has seen. If you've been raised in a Kashmiri Pandit household, it's very common to hear a phrase that says, "Are there only 11 houses left in Kashmir?" Today, this refers to paucity or unavailability of something, but the phrase travels to us from the time when it is believed that Kashmir only was left with 11 Hindu homes, or places like Bata Mazar or graveyard of Hindus that still exists in Valley. However, oral history that we pass on like this from generation to generation does not get accepted by academic historians, or it does not pass the muster of modern historic methods. Modern historians deny its authenticity of the oral history mostly, and in absence of any proof, will not accept any stories of persecution. This has led a lot of people to believe that since there is no historical record of Islamic persecution in Kashmir, there probably was no persecution. This is a lie because we have vivid accounts of persecution that has been written by historians of the time. Just because modern establishment historians chose not to research it or chose to bury it, that does not mean it did not happen. That Islam spread peacefully is a humongous lie. No mass conversions or mass exoduses happen willfully. Here is what is accepted by everyone. Amongst all the contentiousness, this is accepted by everyone that Kashmir until 13th century was a Hindu region. Last Hindu queen was Kota Rani, and Sanskrit was lingua franca. Most literature and history was written in Sanskrit. This is what everyone accepts. What happened after this? In few hundred years that Kashmir became an Islamic state and Persian replaced Sanskrit as lingua franca. Is it possible for such mass scale conversions to happen without resistance? Is it possible that as Islam spread like wildfire in Kashmir, land of Kashmir, it met with no resistance? What happened to those who resisted? What are 7 exoduses that we often talk about? And most importantly, what we want to discuss today is who are those missionaries who spread Islam in Kashmir? Why did they do so? And where did they come from? To discuss all this, I am honored to have a special guest joining me on Epicenter today. Professor K.N. Pandita is a scholar in Persian and Central Asian studies. Born in Jammu and Kashmir, Dr. Pandita studied and worked at Punjab University and University of Tehran, taught at University of Kashmir, and was former professor and director at the Center of Central Asian Studies at the University of Kashmir. He was awarded UGC Fellowship in Central Asian Studies in 1978-88 and was awarded by the President and Vice President of India in 1985 and 1987, respectively, for his academic achievements. He has authored several books, including My Tajik Friends, Iran and Central Asia, and most important, Baharistan-e-Shahi, History of Medieval Kashmir. He has recently authored a book, 10 Studies in Kashmir History and Politics, which throw light on genocide of Kashmiri Pandits in one of the 10 studies. He is a recipient of Padmashri in Literature and Education in 2017. I can go on and on, but that would take time away from this show, and we really do want to hear Dr. Pandita. Dr. Pandita, welcome to Epicenter.
Thank you very much, Madam Sunanda.
Wonderful. It's a pleasure to
Thank
be talking to you. Dr. Pandita, I want to start on a autobiographical note. It seems to me, when I read about your story and about your achievements, it seems to me that you had a literary James Bond moment when you stumbled upon the manuscript of Baristani Shahi in a library in Tehran University, which was an anonymous manuscript written in Persian about Kashmir and Kashmir's kings. Did you go looking for the manuscript in Tehran, or was it a pure stroke of luck? And when you did stumble on it, what were your initial reactions?
uh, Thank you very much for inviting me to speak tonight and welcome my audience. Uh, about the manuscript of Baharistani Shahi. I had read the reference that there exists a Persian history of Kashmir by the name Baharistani Shahi. And then I started my search for the manuscript. I came to know it was available in many libraries in India, including the archives in Kashmir, government archives in J&K. So I contacted the people at the government archives. They said, we have the manuscript, but we will not show it to you. This was something surprising. My repeated attempts to procure a copy did not succeed. And finally, I came to know that there was a note from the J&K government that this manuscript should not be exposed to public. So they did not give it to me. After some time, it uh, increased my urge to know why this has been denied, why the access has been denied to this manuscript. I happened to visit London, and there I went to the British Museum. I had known, I had read that a copy of this book, of this manuscript exists in British Museum. I approached them. They were not that helpful. They were not prepared to give me the entire copy. But something happened. Somehow I could manage to get a copy. And to my great joy, I found it an excellent copy, neat and clean. So I procured it and I started work on it when I was director in the Central Asian Studies in Kashmir University. It took me about 3 to 4 years because it was important to add footnotes to it, explanatory notes to it. Without those notes, no reader would be able to grasp the contents of the book and the purpose of the writer, the author. That took me a lot of time. And finally, I succeeded in preparing a manuscript. Then I got it first published from a printer publisher in Calcutta. There was a reason why I had to go to contact this man in Calcutta. Because in Delhi, people were not prepared to print and publish it. In Calcutta, they did. But only a few copies were published, not many, not more than 50 copies. And that print was not up to mark, up to my satisfaction. But nevertheless, the book came to the English reading public. And there were many requests to me to bring out its subsequent edition. So this year, I succeeded in bringing out the second edition with excellent printing, excellent getup, excellent paper, and without any mistakes, and with many improvements I had made in notes and appendices and so many other things. The reason why J&K Archives Department, or we say J&K government, did not like people to have access to this book, to this manuscript, was that this was the first ever written history in Persian, in Farsi, in Kashmir, which gave a detailed account of atrocities perpetrated on the Hindu minority community, destruction of temples, massacre as infidals and uh, kafirs, the word kafirs, so forth and so on. And for this reason, they would not expose this book.
One question, Dr. Pandita. When you say that you were not given access to the book, it existed in Kashmir, but you were not given access to the manuscript, then you say that it was because of the reasons that it highlighted the massacre of Kafirs and what they did to Kafirs in Kashmir. They did not want it to be brought out. Who are they? Who are they when you are talking about this? Who are they?
The elected government and its institutions who are responsible for providing the library material to the public, and even the law right to information did not work.
Yeah.
I did not find it any sense in pursuing them because they were adamant they would not give, and better was to find some alternative. I had one or two alternatives. Since I went to London for some other work, I managed to get this. That's the story behind it.
Yeah.
Now, in medieval times, most of the histories have been written by Muslim historians of Kashmir and in Farsi language. After after the three historians of Kashmir, that means Kalhana, Shivara, and Prajapat, no history was written in Sanskrit.
So all these histories, Kalhana, Jonaraja, Shrivara, and those four Rajataranginis, they were all written in Sanskrit.
They're all in Sanskrit language. Yes.
So then there is a break. And then all the histories are now written in Persian.
Yes, after 1339, when the government in J&K Kashmir passed into the hands of Muslims, that's Shahmid. Yeah. Then Farsi became the official language, and because they were under the influence of the missionaries from Iran and Central Asia, they introduced Farsi as the official language and the court language, and the historians began writing in Farsi. Thereafter, for another nearly 400 years, all the histories that were written, almost 2 dozens of prominent histories, not small notes or diaries, I'm not talking of diaries, but the histories, they were all written in Farsi. And none of these histories mention anything what the Baharistan writer had said. They just skipped over it, except one historian, Pir Ghulam Hassan Khuihani, who wrote Tarikh-e-Kashmir, and in that it was in about 1891 that he just gave superfluous one or two sentences that during the times of Sultan Sikandar and Shamsuddin Araki, some tyranny was some repression of Kashmiri Hindus took place. That's all, nothing beyond that. The rest of them, the well-known historians, rest of them, Vakate Kashmir and so forth and so on, they did not say anything about the persecution of Hindus, destruction of their temples and worshipping places, their shrines, their massacres, and story how they were converted.
Yeah. So
That
let me
is
just
the
understand
story
the
about
timeline here, Dr. Pandita. Let me just understand the timeline for the benefit of our audience. So Jonaraja, we know, recorded the history of atrocities. Jonaraja was a Kashmiri Pandit himself. He recorded the history of Kashmiri Pandits, and he was a contemporary of Zainul Abidin, Sultan Zainul Abidin. Correct me if I'm wrong. After that, the only other history of persecution that we find is Baharistani. Between that and after that, they have all glossed over the persecution of the minorities in, or not the minorities at that time, but persecution of Hindus of Kashmir. Is that right?
yes. The fact is that the history of Kashmir, I mean the social history of Kashmir, after the advent of Muslims in 1339, right up to the times of conquest of Kashmir by Mughals in 1586. Now, this is a period of about 250 years. The history of this, actually, the history of first 200 years of Islamic rule uh, is not available to us at all. Either this history was never written, or it was destroyed, or it was hidden. We don't know what happened to it. That was one of the reasons why Baharistan had to be given its importance because it is the only history which gives the information, first-hand information of the starting with Sultan Sikandar, Butshikan Aikunu class, his atrocities, and then atrocities by other, the Bayati Sayyids, and then Kaji Chak and Musarena. And then he also gives a hint about Araki, Shamsuddin Araki, and his history, Tofatul Ahbab. After I got a clue that there existed another history by the name of Tofatul Ahbab, written after Paristani Shahi, I started my search for its manuscript. This is a long and very sordid story. Uh, Cut short, I went after this manuscript, Tofatul Ahbab, literally meaning a gift for the friends. I translated it, I gave it the name A Muslim Missionary in Medieval Kashmir because Tohfatul Ahbab is actually the biography of an Iranian missionary named Shamsuddin Araki. Araki should not be confused with Iraq. Iraq is a province in Iran, in northern Iran. It's a province contiguous to Gilan, and part of this Iraq at the time was occupied by the Kurds. The Kurds, as you know, is a community distributed in three states: Iran, Turkey, and Iraq.
Correct.
So he was a Kurd by to his ethnicity, but he was an Iranian. He came to Kashmir in 1574, and I think, as far as I, as a student of medieval history, he has done the maximum damage, atrocities, and persecution of Hindus of Kashmir, which his biographer wrote candidly, very honestly, in Tuhfatul Ahbab, because he had no inhibitions whatsoever. Now, the story of obtaining the manuscript of Tuhfatul Ahbab is a, is a bizarre story.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Go
Yeah.
ahead. I would really like to know, how did you, this is the script, Tawfitul Ahbab script is what you found in Tehran University.
Yes. Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead, please. Now
When I got the
that is why I
clue,
call you, that's why I call you James Bond of Kashmir history.
when I got a clue from Baharistan that there existed another history by the name of Tuhfatul Ahbab, I started my search for this manuscript. The first and foremost was the library of Aga Sahab of Badgam. He is a Shia leader, and he has maintained an excellent library. But the Aga Sahib does not give his books, does not allow his books to be taken out. But anyhow, because I had connections and because I could speak very fluent Persian with Aga Sahib, he happened to be a relative of Khomeini. I went to his home in Badgam. I talked to him in Farsi, and he allowed me to have a look at Tuhfatul Ahbab. To my great dismay, this book did not contain the first and the last chapter because it had in all four chapters. The first was missing, the last was missing. And these two chapters were of my requirement. Other two chapters were not. So I told him, Agasa, thank you very much, but it doesn't solve my purpose. So then I looked at many places. Wherever I got more manuscripts, but without first and fourth chapters. We didn't get it. I was much dismayed. And then finally, I was in Geneva, and it happened a friend of mine uh, who lived in Holland, who had sought asylum in Holland. Uh, he met me. He invited me to his place in Holland. I went there. I did some work for him also. Then I told him I want a manuscript because that manuscript is available only in Askardu. In Askardu, there is a teacher named Akun, some Akun. And I got the information through some friend in United States that he had gone to Askardu, he had seen the manuscript, he had obtained a copy, but he was not willing to give me that copy. But he confirmed that that copy had first and the fourth chapters also. Now, this friend of mine is a very resourceful man. I cannot take his name, nor can I tell you his antecedents, but somehow he promised to get a copy of this book from Askardu. 4 months later, a copy of that book, Tuhfatul Ahbab, came to my hands through circuitous routes, no, not directly, indirectly. It traveled through many countries.
Yeah.
So it came to my hands. And I was so happy to see the first chapter and the fourth chapter.
Yeah. So,
My God,
Yeah, so Dr. Pandita, you've given us good information about how much you had to work hard to find these manuscripts, and really, no historian was really interested in doing that. They sort of understood that what I call establishment historians. They just saw what was available to them and made no effort in acquiring this history. But we'll go back a little bit now. So we understand that you have these two these two historical documents, Baharistani and Tohful Ahbab. So most people think that Islam, wherever it spread with sword, and it spread with violence. However, we are taught that in Kashmir, Islam did not come via violence. Kashmir suddenly became, not suddenly, but in a matter of 200 to 300 years, went from being a completely Hindu land to a completely Islamic state. And this was done purely out of love and with love from missionaries who came from Central Asia. So I want to ask you two questions. Who are these missionaries and why were they interested in Kashmir? That is one question. And the second question is that the fault line that we see in Islamic world, the Sunni and Shia fault line that we see in Islamic world, why is it that in Kashmir it did not work when it comes to persecution? Both Sunni rulers and Iranian missionaries who were Shia, they all were joined, or they all were together in this persecution of Kashmiri Hindus. Why was that fault line not visible in Kashmir? So these two questions: why did they come to? Why were these missionaries interested in Kashmir? Why did they come? How did they spread Islam? And why were Sunnis and Shias working together in Kashmir?
Uh, Very good questions. Thank you for asking me those questions. Uh, a bit of background is necessary to be told. Uh, you see, with the rise of Genghis Khan, the Mongol hordes in Central Asia, there was its adverse impact on our trade routes, Kashmir's ancient trade route to Central Asia and the world beyond. I mean the Silk Route, with which Kashmir was connected. Ancient Kashmir's trade was mostly with Central Asia. This was during the Hindu period, and this was also uh, the reason why Lalitaditya and Shahabuddin had to lead expeditions to Central Asia to quell the uprisings or the intruders who are disturbing peace in Kashmir, and they were disturbing the trade routes also. This is an important reason. Now, what happened? It is true. Kashmir was not Islamized by the warriors from Saudi Arabia, Arabian world. They did not come out with their horses and swords. No. Kashmir was a landlocked area, region, and access to it was not that easy. This is what Alberoni, who had come to Lahore, he writes in his book that it's a landlocked country and access is very difficult. That was one reason why they would not send their armies to Kashmir, number one. The second thing is that uh, Taimur had risen in Central Asia in the uh, towards the end of 13th century or the beginning of 14th century. Now, this was the time when his, expansion of his empire southwards to Iran, he came to know that in Kulab is in modern present day Tajikistan,
Mhm.
there are certain Sufi schools who are propagating against him and against his authority. You know, Taimur was a very ferocious man. After getting this news, he started an expedition on Iran towards Hamadan. In Hamadan, there was a prominent person named Mir Sayyid Ali, who claimed to be a descendant from the line of the Prophet. But I don't accept that because that has not been true. But anyway, he was a social figure, known social figure, and he had some followers. He had some smacking of mysticism of Sufism. So he wanted to punish him. But before Taimur's forces could reach Isfahan, he departed from there along with some of his followers. He took the route from northern part of Iran, that is Central Asia, and then coming down, crossed the Oxus River and entered Afghanistan. And from Afghanistan, he ran along the Swat Valley, if you have at the map, Swat Valley, and from Swat he entered into Kashmir via Baramulla. Mir Sayyid Ali Hamadan. And
Who's
he
known
came to
as Shah
Sri Lanka.
Hamdan, who's known as Shah Hamdan currently in Kashmir.
And the Kashmiris call him Shah Hamadan, the emperor of Hamadan. That is a title Kashmiris has
And he was
given to him.
Shah Hamdan.
Yes, I'm coming to that.
Yeah.
Shah Hamadan came to Kashmir. He set up his seat at what we call Kali Mandir, what the Hindus call Kali Mandir in Fatehgarh. And this was a temple. Kali Mandir was a famous temple where many Hindus used to attend it on festivals and all that. So he raised a platform there and started offering namaz.
In the temple? In the temple?
No, outside the temple. It has a large compound. It is a large compound. On one side of the compound, still it is a large compound. On one side of the compound, he raised a platform. This is what Vaharistani Shahi writes. And on there, he used to offer Friday sermons and namaz and invited the people to join his tradition. Now, one point has to be understood. The question is, had Hinduism become that peak in its Hindu polity, had it become that weak that people immediately responded to him and accepted his preaching, his philosophy, and his namaz, way of life as he preached? Why did the people accept it so easily without resisting? Well, we don't hear about resistance. But nevertheless, that happened. So that is the question which we need to discuss. And we have ample proof to show that towards the last phase of Hindu kingdom, the polity had become very weak, the government had become very weak, economy had dwindled, trade had almost come to a dead stop because of the predators from Central Asia and closing the Central Asian trade ways, the Silk Route, and so forth and so on. So the weakness, this society had become very weak. And then there were internal dissensions also. I give you one example, only one example. When Mahmud al-Ghaznavi conducted his attack on Kangra, from Kangra he went to conquer Kashmir, he arrived at Punj. And It was a small fighting at Punch, and uh, the commander of Punch was a part of Kashmir state at that time, and the commander was defeated, and he wrote a secret letter to the Raja of Kashmir and asked him to raise army and send forces for our support. Otherwise, this enemy is too strong for us to be dealt with. Raja Sahib issued an order that there should be conscription and all the young people will join the army, including the Brahmins.
Mm.
The Brahmins were exempted till that time. But he said that including the Brahmins, the young Brahmins should join the army. The young Brahman started a fast unto death. They went and sat by in a line in Dal Lake, the Gagirwal of today. They sat there and said, "We are not. This is against our religion. This is against our faith. To join army, we are Brahmin. We are not fighters. We are not soldiers."
Wow.
So, and then many of them died and fell in the Dal Lake. Now, this was a condition that there was no reinforcement to the troops who were to defend us. This was the condition in Kashmir to its last phase. And then another proof is that when Shah Mir was made commander by Uttarani, he brought his own people from Panchgavara. Panchgavara means Rajori, Buddhal, Rajori, Punch. He brought his own clansmen, tribesmen, armed them, and raised an army and fought the enemy, and then restored peace in Kashmir. And then the same Shah Mir fought and destroyed this small force which Kotarani had and captured the throne.
So just a question here for the benefit of those who don't understand. Shah Mir came as a refugee. This is what we've heard. Shah Mir came as a refugee and Queen Kota Rani had sympathized with him and accepted him in her court, and she thought that he came from a good, respectable family, so he can act as her advisor. And that is how Shamir found his foothold in Kashmir, in the royal family of Kashmir. And then, of course, rest is palace intrigue and how he deposed last queen of Kashmir, Rani. So he came as a refugee. So Islam came to Kashmir as a refuge. They wanted refuge. He wanted refuge.
Exactly, exactly. You see, Kashmir historians are telling us that he was a progeny of Pandavas.
Oh.
And he lived in Savar. This is what all historians write. But latest research which we have made is that Jun Raja tells us that he came from Panchgavara. And when we deciphered Panchgavara, we came to know that this was the ancient name of Rajori or Rajpura and Buddhil area. And in this area, we now call Highlanders, or the other name which later on came to our notice is Bombas and Cooks. Bombas and Cooks. And from Cooks we have the Gakkars. They were looters. They were miscreants. They were looters, and they looted the caravan. They looted the people and entered their house. These were the people who had formed themselves into groups, and Shamir was also commanding one of the groups.
So he was a
he had
looter.
a right.
Shamir was also a looter from the group of. So Shamir was also a looter.
Yes, he was. He was one of those cutthroats, gundas, and he was defeated by his rivals. He left Panchagauda and came to somewhere between Uri and Baramulla, where some of his people were already staying. He joined them, spent some time with them, and from there, he watched the developments in Kashmir, and he understood that the, the royalty was very weak and the forces were very weak. They were not able to withstand the onslaughts from the predators like Zulchu and others. So he raised these people and came to Kotarani, told him that give me the command, I will set right things here, and those predators who have come from different parts, we will throw them out. So Kotarani wanted a commander who would fight them because her own forces were not capable of meeting the challenge. And of course, his foster brother, uh, Bhikshana Bhatta, was commander of his forces, but he was incapable to meet the challenge. And then Shah Mir got the authority. He raised his own troops, comprising those those Bombas and Khokas, and with their help, he established himself first as one who reclaimed the state and administration, and then he put Bhishma Bhatta to sword. He murdered him, and then attacked in the undercourt and besieged Kotarani, captured her, and then the rest of the story comes. So in
So Shamir,
1330,
Shamir is
now
the first Muslim king of Kashmir, and he set up Shahmiri dynasty. And he did not
that is
invade Kashmir; he came as a refugee. So a refugee comes to Kashmir and takes over this entire dynasty. So now there are two strands going here, Doctor Pandita, because we're talking about the spread of Islam. So one is how Shamiri dynasty came. So there are kings of Kashmir. So they
right.
are doing their own bit. After Shamir came, so then we know that this is a period of Muslim history in Kashmir starts and there are Muslim kings. At the same time, now the missionaries are also coming. Did the kings invite missionaries, or did missionaries, these Sufis, did they come on their own? Or did they see that now this is an Islamic land, this is a place for us to go and spread Kashmir? How did they come?
I said that in modern Tajikistan, there's a place called Kulab.
Hmm.
These Sufis of Central Asia had set up a Khanaka means monastery, Sufis monastery there. And when Sultan Zainul Abidin ran away from Hamadan, he came, through a circuitous road, he came to Kulab, and there he got engaged in discourses with the people already there, and he is reported to have castigated Taimur for his brutality. This message was carried by intelligence people to, to Taimur in
Hmm.
Samarkand. And Taimur came down with a large force to chastise him. He said that she should be caught and brought before me. But before his troops could reach Kolab, he left Kolab, he ran away, crossed the Oxus. Now, Oxus is a very big river. He crossed the Oxus and then came to Afghanistan as a fugitive, and from Afghanistan to Sawat, then again from Sawat to Kashmir because he was told Kashmir is a very safe place and Taimur will not be able to reach that place. So he came to Kashmir. So he was the first missionary,
Hmm.
number one. Number two, important thing about this man. I have made a comprehensive study of his life, his career, his works, his achievements, not only in Kashmir, but in Tajikistan itself. I was in Tajikistan for a long time. I went to Kolab a number of times. I consulted many of the manuscripts in Tajikistan. Finally, I came to the conclusion that he adhered to Shia faith. But, big but, in Kashmir, he did not disclose his faith, whether he was a Shia or whether he was a Sunni. This he kept a secret, and outwardly he gave the information that he was a Sunni, but not against the Shia. In those early days, the Hindus of Kashmir, before they were converted en masse, they did not understand what was Shia and what was Sunni. They did not know. One thing which surfaced at that time was the rishis, who were to play a who had played a very prominent role during Hindu period and were still uh, 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 say, say, say moral custodians of the Hindu society of Kashmir.
Hmm.
Now, an important chapter is to be opened here. That is, what happened to these rishis? What were the rishis? What happened to them? Who were the Sufis? And what happened to this combination later? This is an important question which we must know, and many people do not understand it. Sultan Zainul Abidin, Sultan Zainul Abidin came later, but I'm telling you in times of Sikandar Butshikan, earlier than that. Shah Hamdan brought the Sufism which was prevalent in Central Asia or Iran, and which had by that time distanced from the Sufism of Arabia and the Sufism of initial days of Islamic Iran.
Hmm.
Iran was captured in 1632 by the Arabs, and Zoroastrian empire of Sassanians fell. Round about 1650 or 51, the Sassanian uh, Zoroastrian culture was replaced by Islamic culture. At that time, with the rise of Islamic culture, the Arabs also brought their Sufi philosophy, Sufi culture. Suf means a rugged woolen garment. They used to wear a rugged woolen garment distinguish themselves from other people, plebeians. They were called Sufis. Now, early Sufis of Iran were an amalgam of teachings of Zoroastrianism and Mazdaism and Yasnaism and the early Arabs. They
Hmm.
were mixed of that. And the early Iranian tasawwuf means Sufism. Early Iranian Sufism had great impact of Upanishads.
Hmm.
Now, for instance, Bayezid of Bastam. Bastam is a town in eastern Iran, in Khorasan, very close to Afghan border, very close to Balkh and Bamiyan. And this was an important station of Buddhists also and Hindus also. Now, Bayezid Bastami means Bayezid of Bastam is considered the first among the original Sufis of Iran. And when you read Bastam, you find clear reflections of Upanishads, the teaching of Upanishads, Advaita, and all those teachings there. But this influence continued in Iran for some time, as long as the Iranians uh, had not institutionalized Sufism, but they remained as the proselytized from Zoroastrianism. They continued with this initial philosophy of and culture of Sufi, of mysticism, of Indian origin or of Iranian origin. But with the passage of time, when Sufis got institutionalized in Iran and Central Asia, then many bad things entered into it. As you know, when it became more of a personality cult rather than pure philosophy. Hamadani was a student of the Sufism, which had originally deviated from the early initial Sufism of Iran.
Yeah.
He did not belong to the early group of Sufis. Number one. Number two, you have to remember that Iranian Sufis who came to Kashmir had two peculiarities. One was that they were themselves converts from Zoroastrianism. They were not ordinary Arabs. They were not of Arab stock. They were of Aryan stock. And they were the Zoroastrians. And they had converted, as the Muslims in Kashmir converted from Hinduism. So these Zoroastrians converted. The ancestors of Iranian and Central Asian Sufis were Zoroastrians. They were converts. That's one thing. And the second thing is that they were not of Arabic stock or of Arabic ethnicity. They were of alien stock and alien ethnicity. So you understand that a convert is always much more fierce and much more fanatic than the original man of the original.
True.
A converted Muslim of Kashmir is a much more fanatic Muslim than this original.
True.
That's
True.
the history
So
of
the question here is, Dr. Pandita, that this is established beyond doubt that Sufis came to Kashmir to convert. We know they were proselytizing. This was their job. They were proselytizing. They were doing mass conversions. When they were doing this mass conversions, what is the reason that historians in India romanticize Sufis? Why do we think of them as people of music and poetry and all kinds of wonderful things, but we don't associate them with mass conversions? Mass conversions was also a way to destroy Hindu society. So if anybody is destroying Hindu society, why are we romanticizing them?
That is the precise question. Precise question you have put to me. You know, I have written 80 pages introduction to Tuhfatul Ahbab. 80 pages. And when this book was released here in Jammu, in the press club, my late friend, my very close friend, and my lifelong associate, who is now no more, Dr. M.K. King, we had invited him to release the book. He was professor and head of the Department of Political Science in Kashmir University.
Indeed.
In his introduction, he told the audience that this book is about 300 pages. Tuhfatul Ahbab. Don't read the book. Read only 80 pages of its introduction written by Dr. Pandita. Only 80 pages. And those 80 pages deal precisely with the question which you have raised. You know, the biggest falsehood that ever has been floated is the myth that Sufis are the spiritualists, God fearing men, and so forth and so on. The Sufis are the cutthroats. They are the terrorists of today, is what we find. The terrorists everywhere. They are the terrorists. Read Tuhfatul Ahbab and you will find their actions, their deeds of conversion, of destruction, and teachings. They are exactly saying what the terrorists and jihadists teach today.
Yeah. So you would think,
So,
is it okay to say that Sufis of yesterday are jihadis of today? Would you agree to that? Sufis of yesterday are jihadis of
exactly,
today? Yeah.
exactly. Only it is the nomenclature. You tell them terrorists, you tell them hashishis or whatever, but they are the exact what the terrorists have been doing. Not only me, not only that, but even my professor, Dr. Safa, who is no more now, at Tehran University, I had the privilege of being the student of one of the greatest scholars of Iran, Dr. Safa, who was a fan of Indian culture and Hindu culture and philosophy. He was held in great respect uh, by our leaders, Nehru and Raji. And he was a very liberal man. After Khomeini revolution, because he had always been writing precisely what the Baharisan has been written, things like that. He wrote history of Iran, Iranian literature in 5 or 6 volumes. He says that two curses have befallen the Muslims. Two curses. One is Chengiz Khan. The second is Sufism.
Wow. Two curses have fallen on Muslims, Changiz Khan and Sufism. Wonderful. If there
And
are so far, if there are two takeaways from what Dr. Pandita has told me, and we're going to talk further, but two takeaways. One, whenever Hindu polity has been weak, whenever it has been riddled with internal strife, that is the time that invaders have succeeded. This happened exactly in Kashmir. Invaders would not have succeeded, invaders who came as refugees would not have succeeded if Hindu polity would not have been weak. So that's one important point, one important takeaway. And another important takeaway is that Sufism must not be romanticized. There is nothing romantic about Sufism. They preached yesterday what jihadis or what ISIS terrorists teach today.
exactly,
These two important things that must be understood.
exactly.
You
That
further, Dr.
must be understood
Taking you further,
truly.
taking you further,
Truly.
I have to move on, Dr. Pandita. The question here is, in my lifetime, I have heard a lot about Kashmiriat and Kashmiriat, the composite culture and everything. I suspect this Kashmirian thing came from Sufism, which you have already established was a terrorist philosophy. So, with mass conversions and persecutions that they have done. So, with this perverted Sufism, then came perverted Kashmiriyat. When perverted Sufism mixed with the thing, then Kashmiriyat had to be perverted. So, why? So, do you think that this is the Sufism because they wanted to romanticize it in Kashmir context that they came up with this word which means nothing, Kashmiriyat? What do you think about this word? Do you think that it has roots in Sufism?
Uh, Kashmiri, yes. Uh, for nearly 300 or more years of the rule of Shahmiris and Baihaqis and Shaks and Sayyids over Kashmir, they had only one achievement to their credit, one great achievement, and that was destruction of Hindu civilization and massacre of Hindus. This was the only mission for 400 years. And tell me what other mission they had. No other mission they had. Take it from Sultan Sikandar Butchikan. And this mission, they were prompted by these missionaries, these terrorists coming from Central Asia and partly from Central Asia and partly from Iran. They all come to two incidents. One pertains to the arrival of Shamsuddin Araki in 1574. Araki was from Iran and he was from a Sufi order called Nur Bakshiya, which is a extremist, fanatic Nur orders of Sufis, believing in brute force. There's nothing of the pristine Sufism in their in this Sufism which they preached. The pristine Sufism says one simple thing, that there is no intermediary between man and God. That is simplest, in simple words, pristine Sufism. So, they eliminate God. They brought Islam, Muhammad, and Quran, and Islamic theology, and all that in place of God. So that was the Sufism that was propagated in Kashmir. In the times of Musa Rana, who was the governor or commander also, and Kaji Chak was the commander, prime minister, they decided to destroy the Hindus of Kashmir because Shamsuddin Araki told them that this land cannot be purified as long as the Hindus are here, the idol worshippers are here. This was also preached by Muhammad Hamadani, the son of
Shah Hamdan.
Sayyid Ali Hamadani. Now, this is also to be noted that there was no love lost between father and son. Muhammad Hamdani was totally against his father. He criticized his father for his Shia proclivity, whereas he himself adhered to Sunni proclivity, rabid Sunni faith. That was one of the reasons of differences between father and son. My take is that Sikandar iconoclast is not to be blamed, nor is the Sahabat, his prime minister, to be blamed for massacre and destruction of Hindu society and culture. It is Muhammad Hamadani who prompted him, instigated him, and even threatened him on his behest. He undertook the task of destroying the Hindus. Otherwise, now this Sikandar Butchikan, his two wives, both were Hindus. His son, his two daughters, both Hindus, were given to Hindus in marriage. And perhaps he would never think of destroying the community to which he was so much affiliated. But this is under the great pressure from Muhammad Hamadani. Precisely, the story was repeated when Shamsuddin Araki came to Kashmir. He prompted the local rulers and commanders to convert to Shiaism except Nur Bakshiya order, specific order, which was deadly against the uh, idol worshippers, whom they called whom they call uh,
Kafirs?
kafirs and and zindiq.
Zindiq.
Zindiq. Yes,
Hmm.
zindiq means those who follow the teachings of Zand Avesta.
Ah.
You know, we, the Hindus of Kashmir, we have inherited many cultural traits from Zoroastrianism. For example, fire worship. None of our rituals is complete without fire worship. We must burn the fire to go, for instance, in marriage. They must go 7 times around the fire. And then our marriage is solemnized. So fire is a holy creation, which the Zoroastrians worship. They still worship. They call it Atash. And they have 3 types of fires: the king's fire, the army's fire, the military's fire.
Yeah.
The just small digression, if you permit me.
Yes, please.
You have heard the name Azerbaijan.
Yes.
Azerbaijan.
Yes.
It has been in news. It's a state by Caspian Sea. Now, this was the headquarter in Zoroastrian times. This was the headquarter of Iranian army.
Oh.
And it is a combination of Azer, Padgan. Azer in Avestic language means Atash in Farsi means fire.
Yeah.
Padgah means the headquarter in Zoroastrian language. So it was called Azerpadgan. That means the headquarter of the Zoroastrian army. And from Azerpadgan, it became Azerbaijan. Today, we call it
Interesting.
Azerbaijan.
Dr. Pandita, you have done in you're a one-person army. You are an institution in yourself. You went after these manuscripts all your life. You have tried to find stories about that will prove Hindu genocide. I want to ask you a question, a very honest question. Why is it that modern historians have not been interested in unearthing these proofs that will prove the Hindu genocide of Kashmir, of Kashmiri Pandits, the persecution that Kashmiri Pandits went through? Why is it that nobody is interested in this? Why is it that they don't want to prove it? Why is it that they want to put a blanket over all these conversions and give us this pill that this was a very peaceful conversion to Islam? Why is nobody interested?
British colonial rulers always painted Hindus in dark color, and that persisted down to this day. Forget British colonizers, our own people, our own media, even today, they paint in Hinduism in dark colors because they never had the time, the patience, and the will to read Hindu scriptures, to understand Hindu philosophy. How many in India have read Dr. Radhakrishnan's book, The Hindu Philosophy?
Very few.
How many? So, a canard was spread against Hindus, which persists even today. And then the world's most peaceful religion, that is Hinduism and Buddhism, they have been painted as terrorist religion. In our own times, we have one who said that Hindu terror is much is worse than any other terror. What can you say of that? So, uh, we are enemies of ourselves.
Hmm.
So we do not, nobody is going to write story of our genocide.
We have to do it
Then
ourselves. Yeah.
we
This is,
have to do that.
yeah, you bring
And
out a
it's
very
very late.
important point. You bring out a very important point, that why waste time and why have these heartaches about why are other people not writing about this? We have to write, we have to do it ourselves. You
Yes.
cannot expect other people to take up your story and tell your story and then expect to bring out your point of view or be sympathetic to you. So we have to write our stories ourselves. I agree with you totally, because this has been one of our shortcomings.
I'll give you an example.
Yes.
For 400 years, did any Hindu, did anybody talk about Baharistani Shahi or Tuhfatul Ahbab?
No.
Baharistan was written in 1622, Tuhfatul Ahbab in 1475. Did anybody write about it? Did any Muslim write about it? No, they did not write about it.
Yeah.
They did not want to write about it. They did not want to write the truth. They distort history.
Yeah.
On other side, Muhibul Hassan wrote the history. Kashmir under Sultan. Read that history. He says that not a single temple was destroyed. If temples were destroyed by Muslims, how come that hundreds of temples are still existing in Srinagar? This is the Muhibul Hassan
Yeah.
story. You might have heard
Yeah.
the Kashmir under Sultan.
Yeah.
Things like that. So nobody tried. We have to do it ourselves, and we
Correct.
have to tell the story of genocide,
Yeah.
starting from Sikandar Butt's iconoclast, right? And genocide, mind you, is not only by massacring, killing, cutting the throats. No, genocide has many dimensions. It is cultural genocide.
Yeah.
We are suffering not only physical genocide, but even cultural genocide. Look what has happened to our temples, our rituals, our traditions, and all that. Cultural genocide, psychological genocide, and these are the facets of genocide. They have to be taken
Yeah.
all together at the same time.
A continual, a
The
continual
fear psychosis,
genocide that
fear
started.
psychosis,
Yeah. A continual
the fear
genocide that
psychosis.
started with Islamic rule in Kashmir continues to this date. And the
It's
romanticization of history. For example, when I was a child and when I was studying and I was taught about the tyrants of the time, nobody told me about Shamsuddin Iraqi. It was much later as an adult when I did my own research that I found out about Shamsuddin Iraqi as a tyrant of Kashmir. We are not taught that. Nobody had taught me. My books did not. I did Central Board of Secondary Education. Nobody
even,
taught me that Shamsuddin Iraqi was a tyrant.
even today, very few people know about Tuhfatul Ahmad. When my friend Agni Shekhar once called me, gave me a ring, he said, "Are you at home? I'm coming to you to see you." I said, "Okay, come on." He came. Then he put a question to me. He said, "Dr. Pandita, tell me, when you read and translated Tuhfatul Ahmad, what was your impression?"
Hmm.
I said, honestly, Dr. Agni Shekhar, should I tell it in Urdu or in English? I told him, Dr. Agni Shekhar, when I read this book, I began to feel my body, my arms, my legs, my head. Am I alive?
Yeah,
Am I alive? How am I alive?
yeah,
That is the take
yeah.
after reading this book.
It
And
was,
this is the impression of everybody.
yeah. Those of us who
How are we?
survived, I mean, you and I both are survivors of this genocide, and those of us who survived, and those of us who did not, our ancestors clearly did not convert and did not fall to this thing. And I mean, it is a story that gives, you're right, it gives goosebumps. The fact that they survived a tyrant like Shamsuddin Iraqi. And the fact that even I lived in Kashmir, and Shah Hamdan was supposed to be a very benevolent some kind of a rishi, and Shah Hamdan was supposed to be a benevolent person, even though as you rightly said, that he came to Kashmir and his first job was to put, he could have put his place for worship anywhere, but he had to do it in that Kali temple. So that is a facet of genocide. When you are, he found only that Kali temple to do his namaz and to do his, call his followers and spread his faith. So that is that is a facet of genocide that we have, as I always say, that genocide has continued from 14th century, and it continues to this day. It's a continual genocide.
After in 1947, the Maharaja's administration was, Maharaja was removed, and the crown of Kashmir was offered on a platter to a man who was a far worse autocrat.
Yeah.
So our death warrant was written in 1947 on 28th of October 1947, when Nehru passed on Kashmir into the hands of Sheikh Abdullah. That was the death warrant for us. That was the start of new genocide. After we have only seen 100 years of peace and tranquility. That is the Dogra rule, 1846 to 1947.
Yeah.
Before that and after that, we have seen the genocide, persecution, all. I'll tell you a story. When Mir Qasim was chief minister, he ordered that a committee should be constituted which will reflect on what type of what script we should adopt for Kashmir. It's a very interesting story. So, about two dozen scholars, Hindi and Urdu and Farsi and all that, they were collected together and they started deliberations. Among them was one, his name was Ibn Mahjur. You have heard the name of Mahjur, the poet.
Yes.
His son, his name was Ibn Mahjur. I knew him well, very well. He was also among them because he was also a writer. And this is story what Ibn Mahjur has told me. I have heard this story from the horse's mouth. And then they discussed, and after discussion, they arrived at a consensus that Arabic should be the script of Kashmir. Then Ibn Mahjur raised his finger. He said, I have to make a submission. Tell me, we had Sharda script for hundreds of years in Kashmir. And even Raj Taranani was written in Sharda script, because time says that the manuscript of Raj Taranani, which I obtained in Srinagar from a Kashmiri Pandit, was in Sharda. So he says, for last so many hundred years, Sharda is our script. And it has been accepted. It was prevalent among the Kashmiri Pandits. Why do you want to shift to Urdu, to Arabic script, which is not at all scientific script for Kashmiri? Because it does not reflect the broken vowels, the diphthongs, all sounds. It cannot represent. But people assembled there, and they were all diehards. They left the movement later on, this jihadi movement. They did not accept. They said, no, it is Islam, it has connection with Islam, so it should be the Arabic script. And Ibn Mahjur, he stood up, he protested, and he left that committee.
Wow. This is a story that has not been told. Thank you so much, Dr. Pandita. I did not know this story because I have often wondered that why should nobody speaks Urdu in Kashmir. Urdu is not our language. Kashmiris. Why is Kashmiri, if the script for, if people of Punjab speak Punjabi and Punjabi is their state language, if people of Telangana speak Telugu, so Telugu is their language, why is Urdu forced on Kashmir? Because Kashmiri
Yeah,
is their language.
exactly.
So, so as you rightly say, that there was one genocide, and then the modern genocide was started by Sheikh Abdullah, and it is continuing till now. Doctor,
This is
I've
this
reached
is
the end of my time. We have really surpassed time. I have time for just few questions because a lot of people are watching us today, and they are sending
yeah.
questions, and we need to ask those questions. Uh, Nitin
Go ahead.
Dhar wants to know, did you face any consequences of telling the truth of Sufism and Islamization of Kashmir? Did you face any personal consequences?
Personal.
Yes. Were you
Uh,
threatened? Were you threatened?
Personal. You see, in 1989, it was the month of September 4, 1989, Tikalal Peplu was gunned down.
Sure, Dad. Yes.
Then I wrote a letter in Kashmir Times. I said, we would like to know what is the policy of the people who are perpetrating violence and killing and killed our BJP leader. What do they want from Hindus? What do they want from Kashmiri Pandits? How do they want us to behave? How do they want us to treat them? Understand them? What's their purpose? The next day, the reply came that join us for independent Kashmir or be prepared for the consequences. So I took that letter very seriously and I left Kashmir.
Yes.
Personally, I have never after that, I had never any threats issued to me. But strangely, I never stopped writing the truth, whether it is Baharistani Shahi, whether it is Tawfatul Ahbab, or whether it is hundreds and thousands of articles which I have written.
Yeah.
Hundreds and thousands,
Truly.
not less than 2,000 articles,
Yes.
or the 10 studies, and so many interventions which I have made. In
Yes.
Geneva,
Yes.
I have made about 40 interventions. So I did make it out of conviction. You know, you told me, you referred to my perseverance in finding out these manuscripts, etc., etc. After leaving Kashmir, I had an obsession that this is our sanskar. This is my sanskar. I have to perform a duty. I'm called upon by my conscience, by my faith, by my tradition, by my bringer to perform a certain duty. I will do it. And I have done it.
Yeah.
I have done it last 30, 32 years, whether in India, whether outside India, wherever I went, whether in USA, UK, Germany, France, in Russia, Japan, wherever I went, I performed my duty very well. And I have often said, and I told this to our adversaries also, whom I know one by one very well. I told them that my duty in Geneva, where I have been going for the last 15 years, twice or thrice a year, my duty is to disprove your theory that in Kashmir there is a freedom struggle. It's a communal struggle. It's a terrorism. It is jihadism. And we have succeeded in that. The whole world knows today that in Kashmir there is jihadism, there is terrorism, and not a freedom struggle.
One
That's
more
one
question.
thing.
One last question. I only have time for one more question. And Dr. Pandita, you have to come again. You have to come again to Epicenter. We have only been able to I feel we've only been able to touch a very small portion of your work. You have to come again, and we'll request you to come again for a show. But for now, I have to ask one last question. Lokeshi Pandita, a young viewer, is joining us. She says, is Kashmiriat the new age lexicon for Sufism to hide the indigenous Kashmiri Pandit genocide and Islamization of Kashmir? Because every time you see politicians, they all will say, "Hamari Sufi parampara ka, is getting attacked," and nobody will tell you that the Sufi parampara is nothing but the terrorist parampara, which you have already established. So Lokeshi wants to know: is Kashmiriat the new age lexicon for Sufism to hide the indigenous Kashmiri Pandit genocide?
You see, a community, small community like Kashmiri Pandits, with a big, huge cultural fund behind it, the huge baggage of civilization of 6,000 years old, has been thrown out of its home, and it's scattered all over the world, in India and elsewhere. Now, for this community to reassemble and revive its cultural traditions and customs and huge fund, whatever it is, there are prerequisites which are not available. Number one is patronage from the government. There is absolutely no patronage from the government, rather, there is discouragement from the government. And I personally have been always saying that, like Kurds, Kashmiri Pandits have no friends. We have no friends. That's one thing. The second thing is that our widespread dispersal is a big question. If we had left Kashmir, and if the government of India, if there were sensible people in New Delhi at the time who could understand the situation, they refused to understand the situation, but who could understand and had some vision, they would have set up a temporary camp, temporary temporary rehabilitation somewhere in some area of India till we returned to Kashmir and the situation was conducive. But they never did it. They left us to our fate, and we began to serve our own interests. This could not be, the cohesion of the community was broken. That's what is a great disadvantage. Individually, people did. After all, our women folk, after they left Kashmir, they sold their property, they sold their ornaments, including Dilhor, which is so important for Kashmiri women. They sold it, but they educated their children in exile. And now we have a good number of people at a good posts here and there. They did out of their own labor, out of their own vision and thinking. Nobody obliged, nobody. A few hundred rupees they are giving as relief. That's nothing. That is nothing. So there are so many examples which can be quoted how our own people from rags, they started their life. And now many of them are CEOs and big places, huge places. I know many people whom I provided relief in camps or at other places, who once a boy came to me here in my home. It was month of July. It was terribly hot. He came to me. He was wearing a shirt, a shorts, only a shorts, and a rag of a shirt. And in his foot he had nothing with his mother. He wanted some support. We supported him. And that boy is now one of the top engineers in India. So These people
Dr.
look for
Pandita, thank
themselves.
you so much. I'm really running out of time, but to wrap it up all, what we decided today in this, what we established today in this show, in Epicenter today, is that Sufism was a terrorist ideology that came to Kashmir, that sort of metaphors into Kashmiriyat. So this terrorist ideology then from Sufism became Kashmiriyat, which is again nothing but a terrorist or ideology that denies Kashmiri Pandit genocide. Kashmiri, for my young audience who are watching this, I want to tell them reject the word Kashmiriat, because the word Kashmiriat is a genocide denial word. It is a word that denies our genocide, and we have already traced where it comes from, and we have already said that this is a genocide denial, one of the ways of genocide denial. For Dr. Pandita today, and knowing what he has done to bring our stories of our persecution, I can only quote a few lines that I read when I was young, and those always come back to me as a tribute to Dr. Pandita. I want to tell him, then out spake brave Horatius, the captain of the gate, to every man upon this earth, death cometh sooneth or late, and how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods? Thank you for your work, Dr. Pandita. Thank you for being with us on Epicenter. We hope to invite you again. And with this, I end today's episode. This has been a remarkable episode. We have traced this history of Sufism in this 1.5 hours. We've gone about time, but I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did. Stay tuned to Epicenter. We're going to bring you many more conversations like this, a deep dive into issues that are skirted through that people don't want to talk about, the elephant in the room conversations that we're going to talk to experts. Stay tuned to us. Follow Epilogue News Network on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. If you're on Twitter, you can follow me. I give updates there. Be well, read as much as you can, and join us next week. Thank you. This is Sunanda Vashisht signing off.